Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings, guys. I am Kings, and today I have a very different project going on. It's going to be made out of metal. Now, I am no professional, amazing welder by any means. I have welded a bunch in my lifetime, but if you're coming here for super expert advice on welding, this isn't it. But I am building a set of shelves for the same company I built the floating shelves for in the last video. Let's get to it. Here I have all the metal that's going to be required for the two shelves I'm going to make. And one of them, the height really doesn't matter, but for the other one, the smaller shelf that I'm going to be making needs to line up with the top of the door. So although I had this cut to length at the metal supply store, I need to attach the feet to the 4 posts on the smaller one and then measure from there to cut it to height because I need it to be exact. So the first thing I'm going to do is tap some holes for the adjustable feet that we're going to put on the bottom. And then I'll take those feet and weld them to the posts, then make my cut. So here at the drill press, I have one of the side pieces that I have cut to the total depth of the shelf. But since this is going to go in between the 2 posts, and it's 1.5 inches, I have 3 inches left over. So I'm going to use part of the cutoff to make the foot base that will weld on to the uprights. So I'm just going to put a couple of 45-degree marks here to be able to find center. And this is where I'll drill. So I'm going to drill through this and through the other side. And once I cut out this little piece, that'll give me 2 feet. And what I'll do is then I'll just turn it and do the same process. So I'll have all 4 pieces that I need from one piece. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. So I'm just going to get it lined up. Then just put these magnets on each side just to stop it from spinning around. There, now I got 4 holes drilled here. Now I'm just going to tap these holes. So I have no idea what I was thinking. That hole is way too small. I'm not sure why I thought that size, but yeah, it's not even close to the tap size. So I got to re-drill these with the correct size hole. Okay, that looks better. So I think I'm going to try to tap this 2 ways. One with a hand tap, and I'm using a spiral tap because they just work a lot better. And then I'm going to try putting this in my drill. Since it's thin metal, it's only 1/8 of an inch. I think it should be easy enough to do with a drill, but I'm going to do it with this first. So now I have it in my drill here. I'm not sure if this will work, but I'm going to try. So that seems to be the way to do it. That went a lot faster. And I think I was a little bit more square going in than that other one. So I'm just going to do the rest of them just like that with the drill. Now that I have these drilled out, I'm just probably going to take a grinder and cut these into little squares, because then I'm going to take these squares and put them on the bottom of each of the uprights. So I'm just going to be using a thin cutoff disc and just a cordless grinder. And that's upside down, but it just snaps on there like that. So trying to spin it the opposite way so the sparks weren't flying at me since I don't have a guard on there. That apparently was a bad idea. So I don't have a proper welding table that's metal, so I'm just going to be doing it on my workbench covered with a layer of OSB. I do have a fire extinguisher handy just in case something happens, but I don't anticipate anything bad happening. So I'm going to do all my welding basically on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is weld this little metal piece that we just made for the feet onto the bottom. This is one of the uprights of the smaller shelf system. Now my ground rod for my welder is just this little twist-on magnet. So it works, yikes, it works really well. Just set it on here, twist the handle, and then it welds it just like, it doesn't weld it. It holds it there just like what I was using at the drill press. Very, very strong connection there. That way I don't have to try to find a place to clamp. So I'm gonna put on some of my welding gear because I don't like molten metal splatter getting all over me and burning holes in my clothes, and I'll get to welding these bottom feet on. This is the welder I'm going to be using to weld the frames together. It's a Millermatic 140 MIG welder. I've had this for probably, I don't know, 10 years or so. The day after I bought it, an employee dropped a metal bar on the side, which is why it no longer has a side door. But other than that, it still works like a champ. Okay, so here's the bottom welded on there. So it's not perfect, but it'll definitely hold. And then obviously I'm not going to touch this now, but this will get ground down to kind of match the radius of the corners on the outside there. So I have the 4 legs welded up now, and I just want to round these corners over, and to do that I'm going to be using this little disc that works with this pad for the grinder. The pad is threaded on like you would normally, and then it has a unique locking system where you just press it in, line it up with the star, press it in, and then twist it on, just like that. And this pad is nice because it's flat. So if you were to use a sanding flapper, you can get gouges and stuff in there. So whenever I want flat, I'll use this pad here. Alright, so here's basically what a finished corner will look like. Now I'll probably sand this with a little higher grit to get rid of some of the lines before it eventually gets painted. Now I have some little pitting there from the welding, so that means I had some impurities in there. But I can fill that with Bondo or something just to cover that up before I paint it, because I want it to look smooth and perfect when I get done. Now this will be facing the floor here, so I'm not too concerned about the bottom, but the corners look real nice, and I can just continue sanding them a little bit to just get them a little more polished. But once this is done, what I'm going to do is thread this all the way on and then take my measurement from here, because like I said, this smaller one has to fit an exact height. And what I'll do is I will measure from here, but I'll take off about 1/4 of an inch. Since these legs are adjustable, that means I don't have to cut it super precise. I can always just adjust the feet to match that height, because it doesn't matter how much of a gap there is under the floor. It just matters that the top lines up with the door. And we'll see in the end which door I'm talking about. But for now, I'm just going to carry on with the other corners, with the other posts here, and get all these sanded up here to match this one before I cut them to length. Now that I have all the legs cut and marked, I'm just going to use this metal chop saw to cut them to length. Now that I have the legs cut to length, I want to go ahead and clean all the metal that I'm going to be welding together. I'll need it clean where I'm going to make the welds anyway, and I'll need to clean it all off at the end before I paint. So it's a lot easier to do most of all the cleaning now while it's all apart, rather than when it's all together and there's squares and joints I got to work around. Now I've switched out on my grinder the grinding disc that I was using to a non-woven pad. And this is, they come in 3 different types. I can't remember what they all are, but I know there's a hard one and a soft one. This is a hard one, non-woven disc they call it. And this is just gonna quickly loosen up all this grease and grime that's on here. And then I'm gonna wipe it all down with some acetone. Now I am using chemical gloves. I don't think you need to. I just happen to have these because I was working with a chemical that was eating through my latex gloves, and then I tried the non-latex gloves. I can't remember what they're made out of, nitrile I think, but it was eating through both of those, so I ended up getting these chemical gloves, and I actually kind of really like these. So I'm gonna grind it down with this, wash off the acetone, and then it'll be ready. And I'm gonna do that to all of them. So this is what it looks like after it's clean. You can tell major difference. So I'm gonna do that now just so you can see the process. It actually goes very fast. So you can see it gets off tons of soot from this that would otherwise be in the paint and in the weld, which is definitely what I don't want. Now that I have this done, I'm just going to go ahead and clean all the metal parts, and I'll see you on the flip side. So now I have everything I need for the first set of shelves cleaned off, and I went ahead and put a taper on all the edges on the ends, because I want to fill in the void between the metal, I should say the legs, and this piece, because I'm going to grind it flat. And if I just have the weld sitting on top and I grind it flat, I'll only have a little bit of weld down in there holding it together. By creating a valley that I can then fill up and then grind flat, I have a lot stronger bond between the two metal pieces. So I have these ready to go with their layout marks, but what I need to do is hold them together. So to do that, I'm going to be using these magnets here that will hold them square and in position. So you can see obviously it's not sticking until I turn it on, and you can see how that one snapped it into position to hold it square with this. Now I only have 4 of these, so what I'll do is just set all these in place on one side and then tack weld them all together, and then take them off, move them to the next side, get that square, tack weld that together, and then keep going down the line. And eventually what I want to have happen is the whole thing assembled but only tack welded together. I want to make sure this is all square before I put a ton of welds on it. And even with that, when you weld, you're adding a lot of heat, and heat can change and bend the metal and pull it out of square. So I'm going to try my best to not let that happen. All right, so I'm going to get these all in the position, square and flush with the edges here. I'm probably gonna have to tip it up on its edge for that because my tabletop isn't, it's not perfectly flat like you would see on a welding table, but I'm gonna make do with what I have. So you notice I haven't welded these crossbars here, but I did the two corners. And that is because I want to get it on its side and make sure that it's square before I weld those up. Now to measure for square, or to test for square, I should say, I just measure from corner to corner. If the dimensions are the same, it's square. The longer dimension, if they're not the same, needs to be squished together, which will make that shorter and make the other dimension longer. And you notice I don't have these cross braces down here, and that's because the customer decided he wanted more shelves, or one more shelf here, so I don't have enough metal because I didn't account for that. Which is why those are out right now, but as soon as I get to the metal store and get more tubing, I'll be able to put those in. So I'm not leaving them out for some strategic reason. It's just because I don't have anything yet. So I've measured this already, and I don't need to move it. It's already square. But if you did need to move it, if you were building something like this, and it was out of square, you just need to get a long clamp on there on your longest dimension, and then just squeeze it in until it's square. So then I would leave the clamp on there and then weld these up. Now mine doesn't need it, but that is what you would do. So let's say you had a dimension of 10 here. Obviously it's way more than 10. And the other dimension was 9. That means you have to move it 1/2 of an inch, because if you think, oh, 10 to 9, that's a whole inch, you only need to move half that. Because if you move a 1/2 of an inch here in, it'll push that out a 1/2 of an inch. So when you're measuring it, you'll be like, well, I can't measure from corner to corner because now I have a brace there. Well, you just need to mark down your two numbers, and whatever the total difference is, divide that by 2 and add that to your shortest measurement, and that's what it should be. So then if I came here and measured this corner to corner, it would then need to be 9.5, because then that 10 would now be 9.5, and this 9 would be 9.5. Now, if you don't have a long enough clamp to make that total distance, what you could do is take 2 shorter clamps or 3 shorter clamps, and I'm assuming you have at least some clamps, and hook this on that end and hook the other clamp to this end and go the extra distance. So if you don't have one that's long enough, or you have a really big project that doesn't have long enough clamps, just add clamps together. Yeah, just add 2 clamps together to get the length that you need. So you'll notice I'm using a clamp here to pull this in, and it's not because these pieces are shorter, all of them are the exact same length. It's that this metal has a little bit of a bow going out this way, so I just need to pull this in tight so I can weld it. And I'm just making sure that this lines up with this plane, lines up with this plane, and this edge lines up with this edge. So the small shelf is now all tacked together, and you can see in the back I have the larger one is all tacked together and welded together as well. So this one is ready for the welds to be ground down so it can look pretty. And now we're just gonna weld up the front seams, basically the ones that you would see off this front with a MIG welder. But for these joints right here on the level areas, I'm going to be welding it with a TIG welder because I can weld it just a little bit better where the weld sinks in, but it almost looks like it's barely there. It's very concave and it just looks that much nicer. Now I could weld this with the MIG welder and do a pretty decent job, and I could even grind it out so it looks like it's one solid continuous piece throughout like we will do for this. But this is just for a display shelf, and there are tons of joints on there, so it's not really worth doing. No one's ever gonna pay attention to those little joints. Now I will grind these down, as when you come up to the shelf, those would catch your eye if they bumped out or didn't look smooth or flat with the metal. So once I weld that with the TIG welder, I'm gonna grind it down, and so when this is all painted, it just looks like a continuous piece just on the face. And once we add the wood to this and the LEDs, no one's going to be paying attention to these inside ones, which I am going to make look super nice. They're just not going to be ground down to make it look like it's one continuous flowing piece that you're like, ooh, how did that get put together? Okay, so I'm going to weld these up right now with the TIG welder first, and I'll show you what those look like. And this is the welder I'm going to be using for the TIG welding. It's a TIG 200 LCD Eastwood Elite. Okay, so you can see what that looks like there. It's still hot, but see how it's just nice and smooth and flat. And once that gets painted, you wouldn't even focus on it because it's just so smooth. Now, if I take you over to, so these are the welds for, oh, there we go, that I have on the big ones. You know, it doesn't look bad, but once I grind it down, it's going to look a lot better. You know, there was some impurities there, which is why you get those little holes. I'll sand it down, and if I need to, I'll just re-weld it to make it look better. I come around, you know, I got a little better there. They're not anything too fancy or anything, but I don't really want those in the corners. I mean, it looks good enough, but I just love how the little TIG one looks here. It's just so smooth, and maybe you can get that with the MIG, and I'm just not good enough. Like I said, I'm not a professional welder or anything. I want this focus here. This is what I'm going for there, and I'll do that on all of them. I don't have any of the other ones welded yet, but that's the next step. Get all the TIG welded and then weld the MIG here. Okay, so I have this just lifted up on my forklift just to make it easier. So I have most of the TIG welding done, and this is what it's looking like. Now, I've heard on other YouTube videos, this is my first time ever doing TIG welding, that this discoloration here is considered the heat affected zone, so how far the heat kind of travels out where it's actually kind of changing the metal. And from what I understand, this heat affected zone is supposed to be right next to that metal. And I have tried a ton of different settings, raising up the amperage, raising it down, pulsing it, everything, and I cannot get it to be any different no matter what I do. So if there are any TIG welders out there, let me know how to change this. This is 1/8 inch steel. I just don't know how to make that heat affected zone any smaller. I mean, on this project, I'm not really that worried about it. They say it changes the metallurgy of the metal, or the whatever you would say about it. But this isn't going to be holding a whole lot of weight, so I'm not really worried about it. But every single one looks exactly like that. Now, and I moved the welder as fast as I could, you know, cranked it up and went really quickly across here, and still I could not get it to shrink down. So I'm not sure what the issue is there. But now that I have it up, I'm going to start all the MIG welding here on these vertical sections that I'm going to actually grind down and make smooth. So this is, I started on the bottom because I had it lifted up for the TIG, and I thought, oh, I might as well do it. So that's what my weld will look like before I sand them down. So I'm going to go and do this whole one here and get it all TIG welded up. Next, I want to work on getting some metal put together that will hold up the clothing rack that's going to go on here. And I've just clamped these two pieces of square tubing together because I need to cut one face out, then I'm going to turn them together and weld them together, and then take it over to my CNC plasma cutter to cut a perfect circle for the clothing rack, and then I'll cut it in half on that line, and each half will be used to hold up one side of the clothing rack. So I'm just going to cut this with just my manual plasma cutter here. So I have most of the welding done, and now I want to grind these welds off to look smooth. And I've switched from my cordless grinder to the corded one, because there's going to be a lot of grinding to do on this to make it look smooth. Once that's done, I'm going to start cutting the wood that's going to go in here, and then setting the brackets that are going to hold the wood up. And that'll be the last things to weld on here, are the little brackets. And I'll show you in a little while how I'm going to do that. But for now, I'm going to go around and grind all these welds just on the outside faces. I'm not going to worry about the inside or this, as once the wood is in, you won't really see this, and these already look nice enough. All right, once I got this all sanded down, I smoothed this down as well, added the bar that's going to be for the clothing, and just welded that in to the arc that was on this piece, and then used one of the circular cutoffs to fill in the end of that clothesline. Then what I did is I went ahead and welded these little brackets on. Now these little brackets, I just had some angle iron that I just drilled the holes in every inch and then cut them an inch wide to give me the little angle pieces here that are an inch wide with just one hole in it. And then to weld that on, I'm just taking a bit of scrap of the square tubing I cut off from before and using a clamp to hold it on. That way it sets the height perfectly. Since this is 1.5 inch tubing and my wood that I'm going to put in there is 1/2 inch, I got an inch angle iron. So when I set this on here flush with the bottom, which is why I use this piece, because with this rounded corner it's very hard to set the bottom accurately. But with that piece, I set that on there, and now from here to here is exactly 1 inch. So my plywood piece will fit perfectly. With these all ready to go for this shelving, I'm going to put these on here, and I'm welding it on with the TIG welder without any filler. So I'm just heating the metal up and melting it together. No additives. I don't need the weld to be incredibly strong or deep by any means, as it's not really going to be holding much, just the little lightweight products. All right, let's get to welding. It's been a couple weeks now since I have put those brackets on, and even though I repeatedly said it was going to be painted, the customer decided that he wanted it powder coated. So I sent this off to a local company in Arizona who did the powder coating, a one-man shop, did a really nice job. I just got it back today, and I want to show you how this turned out with the grinding of the welds now that they have finish on them. I have a light raking across this so you can see just how flat this metal is once it's ground down. Now, had I used a flapper sanding disc, which a lot of people like to use, it's very hard since this is kind of pliable, pressable, whatever. It gets in there and makes a little swoop. So you see a flat, a dig in, and then a flat again. But grinding with that flat disc, it just makes a perfectly flat grind here. And let me see if I can focus on the other side. You can see there as well, it's just a perfectly flat transition. Now for these inside corners here, you can see they don't look anything like super amazing, but they wouldn't catch your eye as being, oh wow, that looks terrible, especially for a display shelf. because you won't be looking at that. You'll be looking at just the sides, what your eye catches right away. Now this here is the bigger shelf, and on this one shelf, as it's going to be holding product that's anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000, I thought I'd make this shelf look the best, take the time to grind these corners. So this is what it could look like. It looks like the metal just kind of flows up in there. So this one was welded with a MIG welder and then ground down with that same flat disc as I do the faces with. And here is what the close rod looks like. Just looks like a nice flat little surface. Grinding down really just makes it look nice, I think. And then just looking at the little brackets, kind of looking from down, looking up. So you can see kind of my position here is a short one. Just looking up, because these will really be the only ones you see, since once we put wood on this level, that level, you won't see them. You only see those. And the welds may not look just super awesome ground down or anything, but it also wouldn't catch your eye. Just a nice little weld there with the TIG welder, as you guys saw, just to hold those on. And now you're going to see what the welds look like, or what they can look like if you take your time and do a nice job grinding with the right disc. It's time to get the wood put in here, and I'm just going to cut the wood with my track saw and then add the LEDs to this in the same way that we did for the floating shelves, which I think was in the last video. Now this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have to route wires through the posts here and go from shelf to shelf, because I want the wires to be hidden, but I want all the LEDs powered from one source. So I don't want to have to run power supplies, those big boxes we added in the floating shelves in each shelf, because that would just be ridiculous. So all the LEDs are going to be powered by one power supply. So let's start with cutting the wood first. So I like to use the track saw whenever I have big sheets of plywood, because sometimes it gets a little bit cumbersome to put them on the table saw. But if I cut this across to the total length of each shelf, I can take what I cut off and then rip it on the table saw so they're all the same size. I have all the panels laid in here, but when I cut them about 1/8 of an inch long, just in case anything was out of square. Judging by the gap that's right here, it actually looks like it's stayed square amidst all the welding and the heating up and cooling down. But one thing I still have to do yet, because in these corners on the inside, I didn't grind them down at all, I need to just put just a slight little 45 in all the corners so that they'll sit down flat, and then I just got to trim them up to length, and then these should fit right in. And I'll cut those little 45s on the corners just with a sander. So I'm not really cutting them. I'm just going to give it a little tap on the sander, sand it right down. Now you can see that that gap is gone, because the corners now can fit right against those little welds in the corners. Now I just got to do the same thing to all the corners, and the boards will be ready to be plopped in place, but I need to take them out again to do the LEDs. Now that I have the shelves done, I've taken them out so I can work on the LEDs, and my plan is to drill a hole in each corner to feed the wire for each LED strip. I'm only going to have one LED strip on the front of each shelf, and I think I'm going to put one under the bottom shelf too, so it kind of has that cool glow look below it. But I need to get all the wires down through this upright to the bottom, and then it'll come out and feed the power bank. And that's going to be real tricky, since I need to be able to put a wire in a hole here, bring it down, and then out that hole in the bottom. But we'll see how it goes. The first thing I'm going to do is drill all the holes I need for the wires, and I'm going to drill a large hole for the bottom and then a small one where I can feed the wire in at the top. I don't want to do large ones in these upper ones, because someone could look under and see, and I don't want a big gaping hole, whereas no one will ever be able to see the hole in the bottom. But I need it to be large so that I can feed the wire through there. Let's do it. Now let me just describe the process of putting this wire in. So I started at the top and I just fed wire in through the small hole and pushed it all the way down to the bottom. Now to get it from the bottom out of the hole, I used my endoscope here and shoved the camera all the way down. Now the angle that I had the camera pointing wasn't really that great, but I did manage to snag the wire and pull it through. That one was fairly easy. On the next one, I changed the angle a bit so I could get a better shot of what I was actually looking at in there, and that actually worked a lot better. The second wire that I did was by far the easiest to pull out through that bottom hole. So yeah, what you're seeing in there is the inside of that 1.5-inch tubing, and the center silver thing is the threaded leg coming up from the bottom. And like I said, that second set was super easy. Just a little bit of, it's hard looking at the screen and turning the little hook, and it's kind of opposite of what I'm looking at the screen, but I was able to do it. I definitely give a lot of credit to doctors who have to do surgery through an endoscope. Once I got to the third wire, the final one that has to be run through this post, I ended up making a little wooden push rod because the wire curled up on me as it went in through the hole. I just cut a couple of notches in the wood and then used it to press the wires down. The problem with this is it really made kind of a wiry rat's nest at the bottom, which led to a real long struggle of trying to get the wires I needed through the hole, because there was one wire that was bent blocking me from getting it through. And I couldn't just pull the wire back out. This is the wire on the second shelf from the bottom. And once it was in there, I couldn't pull the wire out. It would not come. It would have to bend through my drilled hole, which has basically a razor sharp edge on it from drilling it out. So I wasn't able to pull any of the excess from there out. So what I ended up doing was taking another piece of metal bent opposite of the hook to use as a little push rod to push that wire out of my way that was blocking me from getting the wires I needed out. This is obviously sped up in a lot shorter time than it took, but I was struggling getting this last set of wires out. Once I had the wires pushed out of the way, then it was just a matter of figuring out which were the actual wires that I needed to pull out, because everything in there is now just red and white. But eventually I was able to finally get the wire pulled, and I was able to pull all that excess out. Now I did pull one and it kind of knotted it up inside, so I had to take a wire in there and try to untie a wire knot. But I did eventually get it, and it was just a great feeling to finally be able to get them all pulled straight, all the slack out, and it turned out great. So these are what I'm using to pull those wires out, or what I used. They're just wire ties that you'd put around rebar. The first little one with the hook. It looks big in that endoscope camera, but it's really quite small. Then the one I used to push it, same kind of deal. I just bent it in a different way. Just thought I'd show that because the thing made it look really huge, but they're really, really tiny. Now that these wires are in, what I'm going to do now is solder all the ends of the wires on the bottom together to make one line that I can connect into the box. And to do that, I've stripped all the wires. Then I'm just going to combine the light colors together. So here the wires are just for the power going out into the LEDs, and I'll add this final wire coming from this direction. So I'll solder these together first and then solder these on. I'm going to add these little shrinking covers on here first, so that once I solder this on, I can cover up that connection. With those on, I'm just going to heat it up with my heat gun here, and that'll shrink the tubing. With the wires all soldered together, I've got the shelves back in, and I went ahead and screwed them down with these 1/2-inch screws. I also took the full strip of LEDs and just cut them in half, and it works out almost perfectly for the length. Could be maybe a little bit longer, but I think since these lights are so high up, as they shine down, it'll really brighten everything up. And I was originally going to plan to put them in kind of at an angle like I did if you saw the floating shelf video. But with this, since the shelves are so far apart, I don't really notice a difference whether it's flat or at an angle. And actually at an angle, there is just a slight shadow on the front edge that doesn't really light it up. So I think what I'm going to do is just actually put this directly flat on the bottom of each shelf. Then I'm just going to solder these ends together just like I did for the bottom connections. And once I do that to every shelf, this project is going to be finished. So here the shelf is finished with the shelves on and the lights in. I'll plug it in here so we can see what it looks like. So you can see each shelf is lit up, and that ground glow looks really cool below it. And the best part is you can't see any of the LEDs from the front. And this will be up against a wall, so you won't be able to see it from the backside either. So it just looks like it's glowing from nowhere. Now all that's left is to get this thing put in its final home, and this project is officially complete. All right, here are the shelves in their final resting place. They actually turned out really great. And even though it seems like there wouldn't be that many welds, I calculated the big shelf has 208 welds and the little one has 192 little welds. So all that just takes an incredible amount of time, and that's not even including tack welding and getting it all square. So it actually takes quite a bit of time to get this together, more than you actually would think it would. You can see here the lights make it look really awesome. I have a shot here in the dark of what it looks like at nighttime with no other lights on. I thought that looked pretty cool. You can see here the powder coating looks really nice, but it really shows fingerprints and it collects dust like a magnet. I wiped it off before I started this video and there's already dust collecting on it. So it does look really nice. It's just, I think it needs to be cleaned more often. I'm not sure if that's because of the powder coating or if paint would do that same thing. It's just because it's a flat surface and maybe it's kind of more dust in the air there. I don't know. But here's the top of the door height that I was talking about earlier in the video that I needed to match because the owner wanted it to line up perfectly. And with the adjustable feet, that made that possible. Here's the big shelf here. You can see it looks real nice. Not a whole lot on it right now, but they did wrap some vines around the corners, which I thought actually makes it look really cool. And that brings this project to a close. I really hope you guys enjoyed that one. It's definitely kind of a newer one using metal instead of wood. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a like and give me some comments down on the bottom. I really love reading your thoughts on it. Unless they're bad comments, I really don't like those, so feel free not to put those. But if you have anything good to say, put it down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And they actually look really well. They look really well. Oh, they have eyeballs now. Philip, you laughing at me over there? Because I feel like you're laughing for some reason.
Oh, I like that.